Sometimes, when you're in a real painful situation at your own personal cross, you go and you share it with a friend. And you really don't necessarily want any response. You just want them to be there with you. But then they say something like, I know how you feel. And you want to shout at them, you have no idea how I feel. They're trying. They just don't get it. A friend of mine studied in Rome, and one of his professors was a pompous know-it-all. He didn't get it either. At one point, he actually said to the class, I know poverty. I've been driven through it. That's about the most ridiculous, absurd statement that a human being can make. I've been driven through it. The reality is, we can never really understand each other's crosses. I can't understand yours and your pain, and you can never really understand mine. But I can give you advice about what to do with your pain. It comes from my own experience of my own pain, and with the confusion that sometimes comes with pain. Why is this happening to me? I was on a retreat once, and I was still processing a very painful situation in my life. And while I was in confession, I was in that place of pain, and why is this happening to me? And I guess I must have asked why a couple too many times. So the priest who was hearing my confession, the Franciscan, did something that kind of shocked me. But ultimately it helped me a lot. At one point, while I was saying, why this, why, how come? He said, Michael, I don't know why. And I was like taken aback. But then he reached into his robe, over his heart, and he pulled out a crucifix. And in a much more soothing voice, he said, and I don't know why God chose this way to save us. But I do know this. I'm convinced that somehow this, as he pointed to the cross, is somehow connected to where you are. And this is where you're ultimately going to find your answers. And one of the things I'm very thankful for from that moment was he didn't say, I know how you feel. Instead, he reached into his heart. His heart, which probably has plenty of its own wounds and pain, but he pointed to the one who knows. He reached into his heart and took out a crucifix. The cross is really where Jesus not only reaches into his heart, but actually gives us his heart, his broken heart. Not so that we can find answers to our questions about pain in our lives, but so that he can be the answer to our question. So that he can be the healing of our pain. I speak about the altar as the place where heaven and earth meet. The reality is the cross is the first altar, and it is where heaven and earth meet. We don't worship a distant God. We don't worship a God who gives us pain. We live in a world that's still growing and becoming, because you and I are still growing and becoming. And because of that, we're going to have growing pains, problems, all sorts of troubles. But God chose to come into that world to walk with you and me in our pain. And he really understands how we feel. He doesn't know poverty because he's been driven through it. He lived it. He was born homeless. He became a refugee almost immediately. He was homeless during his ministry. He was misunderstood and hated and plotted against. He was arrested, tortured, mocked, and spit upon. He knows horrible physical and emotional pain. He knows abandonment and isolation. He knows betrayal by friends. He knows what it's like to have a completely broken heart. Today, we're invited to the place where heaven and earth meet. We're invited to do what that priest did in front of me in the confessional. Reach into our hearts, our wounded hearts, and even our broken hearts. But we reach there not just to touch and caress the wound, but to touch and massage the faith that lies there as well. And then we're invited to bring our pain and our faith to the place where he chose to share our pain. We bring it all to the cross, because the cross holds in it the promise of healing, the promise of resurrection. When you're at your own personal cross, it's okay to ask why. But we're called to ask it the same way he did. From the cross, Jesus asked, why? My God, why have you forsaken me? He wasn't just asking why. He was praying Psalm 22, a psalm that names every bit of pain that he's enduring. But it's also a psalm that ultimately goes on to be a song of praise because of God's deliverance. So as each one of us comes here with our own personal pain, coming forward to the cross, I want to echo the words of that priest in confession. I don't know why any one of us has the pain we have. I don't know why God chose the cross as the way of saving us, but he did. And in faith, I'm convinced that the mystery of the cross and resurrection is connected to the pain that any one of us is experiencing or has experienced. And I'm convinced that this is the place where we will find our answers and our healing. So, I invite you all to do today what so many people have done all during Lent by placing their intentions on our cross. Reach into your heart. Bring your pain to his heart. Let him bring you from the pain of the cross to the peace and the healing that is the resurrection.